Sherlock Holmes and the Dangerous Road. Miss Violet Smith came to Sherlock Holmes's flat in Baker Street late one Saturday evening. She was a beautiful young woman. "Please help me, Mr. Holmes," she said. Holmes gave a tired smile. He had other problems at that time.
"Sit down, Miss Smith," he said. "You don't have the grey face of a city person. You live in the country?"
"Yes, near Farnham, in Surrey," she said, and she began to tell us her story. "My father is dead, Mr. Holmes, but he had a brother. My uncle, Ralph Smith, lived in South Africa. After my father died, my mother and I didn't have much money. Then, one day, we saw an advertisement in the Times newspaper. Somebody wanted us to go to an address in London. Mother and I went there, and we met two men, Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Woodley. They were in England on a visit from South Africa. Uncle Ralph was their friend, but he was dead. Before he died, he asked for their help. He wanted Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Woodley to find my mother and me. It was very strange. For years, my uncle never wrote to us or looked for us. Why was he suddenly interested in us at the end? Mr. Carruthers said, he heard about your father and he wanted to help you."
"When did you see these two men?"
Holmes asked. "Last December," she answered. "I didn't like Mr. Woodley. He was too friendly. Do you understand?"
"Yes, I understand," Holmes said. "He was interested in you?"
Miss Smith's face went very red. "Yes, but I'm going to marry Cyril at the end of the summer. I'm not interested in other men. Mr. Carruthers was older and nicer than Mr. Woodley. He asked about money, and then he gave me some work. I didn't want to leave my mother, but Mr. Carruthers wanted a music teacher for his young daughter. He said, 'I'll pay you £100 a year, and you can go home to your mother every Saturday and Sunday.' That's a lot of money for a music teacher, Mr. Holmes. So I went down to Chiltern House and started to work for him. Mr. Carruthers' wife is dead, but the child is lovely. Every Saturday I go home for the weekend. At the beginning, everything went very well. Then Mr. Woodley arrived. He stayed for a week, and he tried to kiss me. 'I'm a rich man,' he said. 'Marry me, and you can have everything.' When I said no, he tried to kiss me again. Mr. Carruthers came in and pulled him away. But Mr. Woodley turned and hit Mr. Carruthers in the face. That was the end of Mr. Woodley's visits, of course. Mr. Carruthers was very sorry. 'It will never happen again,' he told me. Every Saturday morning, Mr. Holmes, I go to Farnham Station on my bicycle, and I take the 12:22 train to London. The station is about 10 kilometres from Chiltern House, and the road is very quiet. For about 2 kilometres, it goes between a park and the trees in front of Charlington House. You don't usually meet anybody on that road, but one day I looked behind me. About 200 metres away, there was a man on a bicycle. He was about 40 or 45 and had a short, dark beard. Before I got to Farnham, I looked behind me again. The man wasn't there. When I went back to Farnham on Monday, he was there again. The same man on the same road. And the next Saturday and Monday, it happened again. He didn't come near me or speak to me. But it was very strange. I told Mr. Carruthers, and he said, 'I'll get a horse and trap. Then somebody can drive you to the station.' The horse and trap didn't arrive this week, so I went to the station on my bicycle again this morning. And there was that man again. I don't know him, but he's always a long way away. I can't see his face, only his beard. He wears dark clothes and a hat. I wanted to know more about him, so I went slowly. He went slowly too. Then I stopped, and he stopped. Next, I turned quickly at the end of the road and waited for him. But he didn't come. I went back and looked. He wasn't on the road. It was very strange.
Very interesting, Holmes said. How long was it before you went back?
2 or 3 minutes, she said.
So he couldn't go back down the road, Holmes said. He went into the park.
He didn't go into the park. I could see the park. There are no trees.
Perhaps he went to Charlington House.
Holmes didn't speak for a minute or two. Then he said,
Where's your future husband?
Cyril. He's working in Coventry. The man on the bicycle is not Cyril, Mr. Holmes.
And no other man is interested in you? Holmes asked.
I think that Mr. Carruthers likes me, she answered. A woman knows, but he doesn't say or do anything.
What's his job?
Holmes asked. He's a rich man, Miss Smith said. He comes into London 2 or 3 times every week and visits company offices.
Thank you, Miss Smith, Holmes said. I'm very busy, but I will think about your problem. Then I'll call you. After the front door closed, Holmes looked at me. Is the man on the bicycle a secret lover, Watson? He said. Perhaps, but what's he doing on that road? It's strange. He goes to the same place every time, I said. Yes, Holmes said. And there are other questions. Why did Carruthers and Woodley come from South Africa? Why does Carruthers pay £100 a year to a music teacher? And why doesn't he have a horse and trap when he lives 10 kilometres from the station? Will you go down there? No, my friend, he answered. You will go down. I'm too busy. Go to Farnham on Monday. Arrive early. Hide near the road and watch. Then ask about Charlington House. Who lives there? Miss Smith always took the 9:50 train from London to Farnham. I went on an earlier train and quickly found the road from the station to Chiltern House. I hid and waited. Then I saw a man on a bicycle. He wore a dark coat and trousers, and he had a beard. It was him. I watched him carefully. He carried his bicycle into the trees. 15 minutes later, Miss Smith arrived on her bicycle. The man with the beard came out from the trees and went after her. She looked back and saw him. She went slowly. He also went slowly. She stopped. He stopped. He was always about 200 meters behind her. Suddenly, she turned her bicycle and went after him. But he was too quick for her. She turned back and went up the road again to Chiltern House. I waited. The man came slowly back on his bicycle and then went into the tall trees between the road and Charlington House. I ran across the road. I could see the house, but not the man. In Farnham, I asked questions about Charlington House and learned the name of a London estate agency. On my way home, I went to the estate agency. An old man, Mr. Williamson, is staying there for the summer, a man told me. I can't tell you anything about him. That evening, Holmes listened to my story. He wasn't happy. Why did you hide in the park, Watson? He said. You couldn't see the man from there. The man doesn't want Miss Smith to see his face, so I think she knows him. And then you didn't see his face. We also want to know his name, of course. So what did you do next, Watson? You went to a London estate agency.
What was wrong with that? I asked.
Why didn't you go to a bar in Charlington? The people of Charlington can tell you all about this man Williamson. The name tells me nothing. He's an old man, so he can't be the man on the bicycle. The man on the bicycle moves quickly when he wants to. Oh, don't look so sad, my friend. Perhaps I will ask some people questions.
The next morning, we had a note from Miss Smith. It ended, "I cannot stay here, Mr. Holmes. Yesterday, Mr. Carruthers asked me to marry him. Of course I cannot do that. I am going to marry my Cyril. It is now very difficult for me at Chiltern House."
"This gets more and more interesting, Watson,"
my friend said.
"I'll go down this afternoon."
When he arrived back at Baker Street late that evening, he told me his story.
"I found a hotel and talked to some of the people in the bar," he said.
"Could they tell you anything?" I asked.
"Of course," Holmes said. 1. Williamson is an old man with a white beard. 2. He was a vicar, but not now. 3. There are usually visitors to Charlington House on Saturdays and Sundays. 4. Mr. Woodley is one of them.
Holmes smiled at me.
"I got these answers easily, Watson. But who came in from the next room of the hotel bar at that minute? Woodley. 'Why are you interested in me?' he asked. 'Who are you? What do you want?' Then he hit me. There was a short fight, and I won. Mr. Woodley went home in a horse and trap. Me? I'm fine, Watson."
The next letter from Miss Smith came on Thursday. "I am leaving my job with Mr. Carruthers. On Saturday, I will come up to London, and I will not go back to Chiltern House. Mr. Carruthers has a trap now, so the road to the station is not dangerous for me. But I cannot stay. Mr. Woodley came again. I did not meet him, but I saw him through a window. He has a big cut on his face. An accident, perhaps. He had a long talk with Mr. Carruthers. Mr. Carruthers was very excited after Mr. Woodley left. Woodley did not sleep here, but I saw him again this morning in the garden. I am afraid of this man, but all will be well after Saturday."
"I hope she's right, Watson," Holmes said. "The two of us will go down on Saturday."
Holmes took his gun when we left on Saturday morning. It was a sunny day, a good day for a visit to the country. Holmes and I walked down the road and listened to the birds. We could see Charlington House. "Look!" I cried. "There's a horse and trap on the road."
"Is that her trap?" Holmes said. "Then she's going to catch an earlier train. She'll be past Charlington before we can meet her."
Holmes began to run. He was 100 meters away from me when he stopped. At the same time, I saw the horse and trap again. But now there was nobody in it.
"Stop the horse, Watson!" Holmes shouted. "Oh, we're too late!"
I stopped the horse, and we jumped into the trap. Holmes turned it round, and we went back down the road. "There! That's the man!" I shouted. A man on a bicycle came up the road. It was the man with the beard. He looked up and saw us.
"Stop!"
he shouted, and jumped from his bicycle.
"Where did you get that trap?"
He took a gun from his coat. Holmes jumped down from the trap.
"Where is Miss Violet Smith?" he asked quickly. "That's my question," the man said. "You're in her trap." "We met the trap on the road," Holmes said. "There was nobody in it." "Oh, no," said the man. "They've got her! Woodley and that vicar man. Are you her friends?" "Yes," I said. "Then come with me," he said. He ran into the trees, and Holmes and I went after him. "Wait," Holmes said suddenly. "Who is this?" There was a young man on the ground. "That's Peter," said the man with the beard. "He drives Mr. Carruthers' trap." Peter began to move and open his eyes. "He'll be all right. He can come after us in a minute," said the man with the beard. "Let's go!" We ran through the trees. We stopped when we got to the garden outside the house. Suddenly, we heard a loud cry from a woman. "This way! This way!" shouted the man with the beard. We ran across the garden into open ground. There, under a tall tree, stood 3 people. One was Miss Violet Smith with her hands over her face. Opposite her stood a heavy man with a red face. It was Mr. Woodley, and he was excited about something. Between them stood a short old man with a grey beard, in the clothes of a vicar. He turned and smiled at Mr. Woodley. "And now you are husband and wife," he said. "Quickly!" said our friend with the black beard. He ran to the tall tree. Holmes and I went after him. Mr. Williamson, the man in the vicar's clothes, saw us and smiled. Mr. Woodley laughed when he saw the man with the beard. "You can take off your beard, Bob," he said. "I know it's you. Say hello to my new wife." Our friend pulled off his black beard and threw it on the ground. He put his hand inside his coat. Then he showed Mr. Woodley his gun. "Yes," he said, "I am Bob Carruthers." "You're too late," Mr. Woodley said. "She's my wife." "And you are dead," Mr. Carruthers said. A loud noise came from his gun. Mr. Woodley fell to the ground and didn't move. Mr. Williamson started to take a gun from his coat, but Holmes was too quick for him. "Stop!" he said, with his gun in his hand. "Watson, take his gun. Put it to his head. Thank you. Carruthers, give me your gun too." "Who are you?" Mr. Carruthers said. "My name is Sherlock Holmes." Holmes turned and saw Peter. "And now we'll send for the police. Peter, take this note to the police station in Farnham," he said. He wrote a short note. "Williamson and Carruthers, carry Woodley into the house." Some minutes later, Holmes, Mr. Williamson, and Mr. Carruthers were in the sitting room of the house. Miss Smith sat quietly in a bedroom. Mr. Woodley was on a bed in one of the other bedrooms. I left him and came down to the sitting room. "He'll live," I told them. "What?" Mr. Carruthers shouted. "Then let's go and kill him! That lovely young woman can't be his wife." "She isn't his wife," Holmes said. "Mr. Williamson isn't really a vicar." "But—" began Mr. Williamson. "No, you're not," Holmes said. "I know about you. You were a vicar, but you lost your job." He turned to Mr. Carruthers. "And you, Carruthers, next time leave your gun in your coat." "I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes," Mr. Carruthers said. "I wanted to help Miss Smith because I love her. I always went after her on my bicycle because I wanted to stop these men. She knew my face, so I wore a beard. I didn't want her to be afraid of me. I didn't want her to leave Chiltern House." "But you didn't tell her about Woodley and Williamson, or about the plan," Holmes said. "Why?" "I wanted her to stay at the house with me," Mr. Carruthers answered. "She didn't love me, but I loved her. Then the note arrived." "What note?" Holmes asked. "A very short note," Mr. Carruthers said. He took it from his coat and read it. "The old man is dead." "So he wasn't dead when you left South Africa," Holmes said. "Ah, now I understand." "You do?" Mr. Carruthers said. "Yes, the three of you came from South Africa. You, Williamson, and Woodley." "No," Mr. Williamson said. "I was never in South Africa. I met the two of them here." "That's right," Mr. Carruthers said. "All right," Holmes said. "You and Woodley knew Ralph Smith in South Africa. He said, 'After I die, my money will go to Miss Smith.' It was a lot of money, and you wanted it. So you came to England and looked for her. You had a plan. You wanted her to marry one of you. Then that man had to give half of her money to the other man. Why was Woodley the husband?" "We played a game of cards," Mr. Carruthers said sadly. "Woodley won the game." "You invited Miss Smith to your house as a music teacher," Holmes said. "Woodley wanted her to love him, but she didn't like him. She was afraid of him. And then you fell in love with her. You and Woodley had a fight about it. Woodley left and made a new plan." "You're right, Mr. Holmes," Mr. Carruthers said. "I heard about Williamson, the vicar, and I began to understand Woodley's new plan. After that, I watched Miss Smith carefully. Then Woodley came to my house with the note from South Africa. Ralph Smith was dead. Woodley said, 'I'm going to marry Miss Smith now, or you can marry her and give me half her money.' I'd like to do that, but she doesn't want to marry me," I told him. "Perhaps her feelings will change in a week or two," he said. "I'm not going to hurt her," I told him. And he went away very angry. Miss Smith wanted to leave me and to go back to London this Saturday. Peter took her to the station in the trap, but I was afraid for her. I went after them on my bicycle. Before I could catch them, Woodley and Williamson took her. Then I saw you in the trap, Mr. Holmes. You know the end of the story." "I do," Holmes said. He looked out of the window. "And here come the police. They'll want to talk to you, Williamson, and to Woodley." He turned to Carruthers. "At the beginning, you were as bad as Woodley," he said. "But in the end, you tried to help Miss Smith. Because you helped her, I will try to help you. I'll talk to the police." "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," Mr. Carruthers said. "Watson, go and see Miss Smith," Holmes said to me. "We'll take her to her mother. Then we'll send a note to her young man, Cyril. When he arrives, she'll feel better." "Yes, Holmes," I said. He is usually right.